It's 11 o'clock, so I think we would just start. Welcome everyone to our Table Climate Live Briefing Roadmap to COP30, Human Mobility in the Age of Climate Crisis. My name is Lisa. I'm an editor at the briefing Climate.Table. Currently, we are in very busy times in the calendar of international climate diplomacy. My colleagues are in Bonn reporting from the COP talks there. And the last 2 days, also the very first Berlin Climate Mobility Forum took place. We want to shed a light on this topic because migration and mobility in times of climate crisis are still a niche topic and not that widely discussed, even if they are growing in importance and relevance. And therefore, I'm very happy that we can dive a little bit deeper in there today. I'm pleased to welcome the former president of Botswana, Mr. Masisi here, as well as Rafaela Schweiger, Director of Global Issues at Robert Bosch Foundation, and Kamal Amakrein, Managing Director of the Global Center for Climate Mobility. President Masisi, we would like to start with you. I would love to know from you, why is climate mobility such an important topic and how are you experiencing it in Botswana?
Well, thank you very much. Climate mobility is extremely important to me and to Botswana and Africa, and indeed the world, for the simple reason that there are significant seismic shifts in the patterns of climate that we're used to, and the patterns of climate that we're used to ensure that we also developed a pattern of production in terms of food production that was consistent with the patterns that we're used to, including the seeds that were used and the patterns of value addition. Now, with changes in climate so sudden, it puts everything in disarray, literally. Climate patterns that we're used to enable people to settle and develop their norms and cultures, practices in areas that they are used to. Climate shifts and changes that have taken place now undermine all that. And so there seems to be a very serious test to existential experiences and norms. The climate shifts that we experience now, when studies are undertaken, result in informing us that these are due to the impacts of human activity on the main industrial activity and in certain parts of the world. And those geographies have been identified. And this speaks to the relations that we as Botswana and the rest of those most affected have with those countries. And so the multilateral order comes into play, diplomacy comes into play, and the need for recognizing each other as human beings, and the rights that they have come into play. And so this climate crisis has massive impacts on our livelihoods, on our definition of humanity and relations. And that's why not only does it affect those who are small and in developing countries, it affects those who are big and in developed countries too. Finally, the climate crisis affects all of us. It knows no borders. It knows no territory. We are all in it together. So it's time we accepted that we all have skin in the game.
Thank you. Thank you for your impressions. After you've been in Germany here for the last few days, what do you expect from Germany in this process with climate mobility? What do you need? What does Botswana need?
Well, I've been in Germany for a few days, very pleasantly, and consistent with my expectations, the Calvinistic experiences showed up. Timeliness, neatness, finesse, precision, everything that's German, including the efficiency of running meetings. So I was really delighted with the Robert Bosch Foundation and GCCM for the work that they did that spoke to what we have known Germany for. Germany is a big power, the largest economy in Europe. Germany is a history. Germany is industrially very powerful. Germany is vested in this, and it was very heartwarming and humbling to accept that the German government, to realize the German government, including German institutions, are actually keen on engaging us from the global south on this very issue. So that's very rewarding. And therein lies the possibility of sustainable solutions emerging. And our role is to come here and bring in our experiential input and our intellectual capacities and our influence to bear, to share those with our German counterparts, take these back to our counterparts in places where we come from, and converge and see where we can meet to solve the problem. It's a long-term relationship we're starting, and I'm really glad that through the Stiftung, Robert Bosch, Robert Stiftung, the foundation, they have found it in their priorities to make sure that this engagement continues. And so we come out of it very reinvigorated. And I'm pleased that I do not have this view alone. I've talked to a lot of the colleagues who came here, and boy, we're more than ready to shake the world. So thank you, Germany.
Thank you for your impressions, Mr. President, and these very kind words. Just for the participants to understand also the format of this live briefing, we're going to have now a moderated discussion for like 45 minutes. And afterwards, you're welcome to ask questions. If they already pop up during the conversation, feel free to send them in the chat, and then we will have a discussion part, a more open discussion part in the end.
Thank you.
Now, for our participants to understand a little bit better the importance and the relevance of climate mobility, Kamala Crane, I wanted to ask you, which role does climate mobility play internationally currently?
Thank you very much, Lisa, for having us. To your question, and building on what President Masisi mentioned, this is an issue that taps into core aspects of our objectives in a changing climate. One is how people will adapt to changing patterns, how people could continue to live in dignity and in rights in changing climate. We see it in a very acute matter in the global south, but the global north is no immune place. We are seeing flooding, unexpected and seen and historical flooding in the global north, droughts. We are seeing also extreme heat and increasing temperatures all across the globe. Sea level rise will affect and impact everyone. It is our ambition to press and push forward a new consensus, one that can, as President Masisi mentioned, bring us together on a common path, because we have not lived such a challenge in such a magnitude before, something that brings us to the space where we have to review and redefine a set of understandings. This is not about migration, because over 95% of the people that will be impacted by climate crisis and will be forced to leave the places they call home will move locally, will stay locally.
This is a very important aspect. Maybe I just can hang in here quickly. Can you maybe explain a little bit more in depth what does the term climate mobility stand for, and why should we be using this instead of climate migration?
Correct. The data and the science are so there are two aspects why this nomenclature is very important. First is it is anchored in the wish and the determination of the people who are impacted by climate shocks to stay home. So those who are impacted want to adapt locally. They don't want to move. They want to be given the means, supported and enabled to adjust to a changing climate, but within their communities, within their cities, and within their land. And as such, we are talking much more about an adaptation journey than a migration to a new country or a new region. We were quite surprised that regardless whether you're in the Pacific, you're in Africa, the Greater Caribbean, people have that strong attachment to land and community. And I think this is nothing foreign even to Europe. When flooding hit Germany a couple of years ago, and people were asked or forced to move somewhere else in order to make for new planning, they pushed back. And it's the same thing we see in all over and across the world. So that is number one. Second, if adaptation is not possible and is not achievable locally, people do not want to live far from where they were. So as such, it's much more a mobility exercise within their own rights, their own territories, something that is already provided to them by their constitution and the rights of their countries or regions. So as such, it's a mindset shift that we need to achieve. One that is anchored on how do we support the most vulnerable, those impacted, to adapt locally? How do we enable them to build a positive adaptation journey? And third, how do we ensure that they design and they are part of the design of their own adaptation exercise?
Rafaela, do you want to add here? I had a
yeah, maybe just to make it a little bit more concrete how that looks like, because in those conversations we often we talk about it and then people are asking, what does it mean locally? And for example, we are working with the city of Beira in Mozambique, and they are preparing shelters for communities they know will be regularly displaced at a certain season of the year in the city, to have shelters that are welcoming them, that are proper housing where the whole community can live. And that back and forth movement they're organizing in the city. So it's something that also, speaking from Germany here, which is, we have this fear of climate migrants coming to Europe. This is not what we are talking about. We are talking about climate justice. We are talking about helping the communities that are heavily affected by the climate crisis, and very concrete adaptation, development, city planning, oftentimes, measures, social development, that we can help the communities, and bridging the financing and everything that is needed from the local to the international work that we are doing is so important in that.
Thank you. Kamal, you're the managing director of the Global Center for Climate Mobility. Can you maybe also explain us a little bit what work you are doing with that center and how this is going?
Thank you very much, Lisa. So going back to what you said, the Global Center for Climate Mobility, it's a UN hosted entity that is pretty much trying to press or fill that gap, the nexus between climate action, human mobility, climate adaptation, and climate justice. And as you rightly mentioned, it's an emergent space because it's something that we finally have been able to put a human face on. These are the human face of the climate crisis. So at the center, which is pressed forward by a growing group of champion countries, UN agencies, the World Bank, regional organizations, philanthropies and foundations like the Bosch Stiftung. The idea is how do we build the knowledge in order to anticipate such movement, in order to plan the appropriate adaptation and support these communities. And last but not least, how do we enable them to tell their story? How do we enable them to communicate about it? And how do we enable them to be part of the design of the regional and global policies? How do we do this? We do it first through a regional dimension, because every region has its own story and its own specific shocks. If you're in the Pacific, it's primarily sea level rise, drought, and extreme heat. If you happen to be in Africa, it's crop yield, it's desertification, it's land degradation. So every region has a set of shocks, and we try to bring the region together to define a common agenda and a common roadmap. And then we go down to the national and the local level to help them design those pathways and ensure the needed support to implement the projects. By changing the mindset of how climate finance work, namely through the community's climate adaptation facility that we established, we are now able to give grants directly to communities to support projects that are designed by them, led by them. Small projects. How do you protect a dig? How do you build shelters? How do you relocate a school? How do you reinvent or preserve some set of livelihoods or protect heritage, so they can stay home and they can live in dignity where their ancestors have been for years.
Rafaela, how did the Berlin Climate Mobility Forum contribute to this process?
I mean, the forum was the first forum we did, and we convened an incredible group of leaders, stakeholders from all sectors, academia, youth leaders from the Pacific, from Africa, from the Caribbean, colleagues working in the US, which, by the way, sees massive internal displacement because of the climate crisis. Bringing together and not only those stakeholders and partners, and President Masisi was such an integral part of that, but really building a community around this issue here in Berlin. One, because Berlin and Germany is such an important actor on the international stage. Germany also has been leading on climate mobility issues over the last many years in its development finance, in its foreign policy, with the climate foreign policy strategy. There are so many stakeholders who are here. And this forum was so beautiful because we had the richness of all the different regions of the world who are heavily affected here in Berlin. And I call it a community because it's not only people coming together. You have literally from all parts of the world, from Tuvalu, from Palau, we have the ministers here, we have youth leaders still here in Berlin, staying on for connecting, to work with the ecosystem here on what can be done, how their communities can be supported, but also what we are taking into multilateral processes, the UN High-Level Week, COP30, and what are the practices that we can jointly build. And it's still an ecosystem that we are building around that. And for us, it's the beginning to host these conversations in Berlin, to start partnering with other processes in Europe. But then also bringing the conversations into other regions and connecting the dots. And I think the outcomes, both of the public conversations that we had and the more private ones, the connections that have been made here, are a starting point for people working together on this issue and to raise awareness. And I think having for President Masisi, having the King of Lesotho, having ministers from island states, having the youth here, really raised the awareness on this issue. And Kamal surely has more to say about the importance of the forum for your work as well.
Yeah, maybe we come back to this like a little later, but I also wanted to know, currently climate diplomats are gathering in Bonn to prepare the COP30 in November in Belém, Brazil. I wanted to get your impression, Kamal, which role does climate mobility play in these talks?
We would like to ensure that as we define what adaptation is and how could adaptation come forward, that the principles that were discussed here in Berlin be carried forward, namely that adaptation should be a positive journey. It should be locally led. It should be people-centered. It should be supported, enabled, and financed. And that it is an adaptation to move. It has been for centuries, and it is. And we need to listen to the people who are impacted, how they want to carry that adaptation versus a top-down approach. As Rafaela mentioned, this whole conversation that because of the climate shocks, or Europe will be flooded, or the US will be flooded, or other parts from the global north will be flooded, is just not incorrect. It's just not misleading. It's a big lie. The science, the data, the facts on the ground, the conversations with people, all the studies and the research conducted across 3-4 regions say the opposite. So now how do we ensure climate justice? How do we ensure dignity amidst a changing climate? How do we ensure adaptation that is people-centered versus the adaptation that we see as one of transformation of energy and infrastructure and economies? We need to move as we anchor, as we succeed in that transformation of our economies, transformation of our infrastructure. We should not forget the people, particularly the most vulnerable. And this is where climate mobility agenda could play that role by bringing a sense of humanity to what we can do forward and ensuring that the faces, the human faces of the climate crisis are not left without agency in deciding for their future and the future of our planet.
So summarizing what you said right now, climate mobility is mostly an adaptation question?
At this stage, it is seen in different spaces. Increasingly now, there is the acceptance that is an adaptation, and that's the work that has been carried for 4 years. At one point, people were just looking at it as this is a migration. And then, of course, people got scared that, oh, this migration is going to become an international migration, a cross-border. And we have been able to show, to prove through data science that actually, and facts on the ground, it's not true. And it is a movement within the country, within the village, within the region. If you go to Lagos, Alexandria, or Beira, they are impacted by sea level rise. But people are not moving from Lagos because of that to Rome. They are moving to the neighborhood next door. So how do we plan that mobility within the same city? How do we plan to that relocation within the same country? This is what is happening today, and it needs to be empowered. So I am quite glad that increasingly people are accepting that the shift that we're trying to press forward, one that is anchored on the wish, the will, and the agency of people. And we hope that it will become anchored as a core principle of adaptation, not as some association with a crisis in the migration space or a crisis in a specific sub element of asylum or protection.
Okay. Sometimes climate mobility also pops up in the area of loss and damage. If we talk about places that are definitely destroyed, do you think that's also the right place to discuss this, or should it be done differently?
It's, as I mentioned earlier, the climate mobility, it's a journey, and it's a journey that is locally anchored. If you happen to be, for example, from Tuvalu and Palau, and as a result to increasing carbon emission, irresponsible behavior by specific countries, non-respect of agreements, including the Paris Agreement, people lose their land to sea level rise. That is a major loss. With that goes their heritage and culture. That is, of course, a major loss of existential nature. That is a loss and damage. It was accepted in the definition of loss and damage that those aspects of the climate, of the loss and damage agenda should be addressed and should be compensated for. But those are the aspects that then could help the people build that positive journey. one that is not of grief, but that one that is of survival and resilience. How we could those resources help people to preserve their language, preserve their culture, preserve their heritage as they build a new pathway amidst the climate crisis.
Okay, Rafaela, maybe back to you. I think we understood now quite in depth what are the challenges and which problems we are facing. What would you say are the answers needed to them? Which policies could help?
So one, I want to say that specifically when we speak about the German government is doing a lot already, and you anchoring it in all the different policy fields that are relating to this kind of work will come out as shared on all fronts. So I think one is a very practical of how you work across ministries, across UN agencies, across political processes on these questions, and the Global Center is doing an excellent job showing up at all of these and bringing in those issues on very specific questions, from the oceans to land questions, where you all have the different issues. I want to speak specifically about Germany. Number one is Germany is a champion for the multilateral order. And this is an issue, and President Masisi said that also in the beginning, where you need international cooperation. So really stepping forward and being visibly present with this issue, including with investments, is something that I see as number one. Number two is the adaptation agenda, and really working on it from climate, sustainable development angles. And working with the communities. And here is also how you do it, how you're financing, how localized is the financing. And Kamal was elaborating on the community's climate adaptation facility, where the grants land with the communities. They get there fast. The communities have the ownership of designing and implementing those projects. And at the end of the day, that's cheaper. It's more effective, it's faster, it doesn't take years and years of building a pipelines. Those frontline communities, they don't have time. So it's thinking about the how, and not only the amounts, which have to go up. And then anchoring it in both the climate foreign policy. There is an anchorage in migration policy for the moments when pathways have to be created for people to move in agency and how they want to move, for study, for work, building skills pathways, maybe even into the green transition, jobs, skilling up people from regions where they will have to move. And Germany is leading efforts on the loss and damage fund, and also on that front. That's something where I hope to see movement and further engagement.
You both now mentioned repeatedly finance needs. Can we estimate how much money is needed for climate finance in the next years?
No, we can't.
Okay, but
we can. Sorry, Lisa. There has been commitments in the Paris Agreement for the 100 billion per year. Let's first be true to that commitment. I think it's only recently, close to 10 years after that, we reached that. But as Rafaela mentioned, this is not about putting numbers and commitments and statements. It's the how. There are two different adaptations that needs to happen. One that is of infrastructure, of macro level, infrastructure, energy, industry, because this relates to the framework that carries societies. And then there is one that relates to communities and relates to people. We need to acknowledge the second one. And we need to support the first one, and the commitment is there. Just be true to that commitment and deploy the resources that you promised and you committed to. But second, do not let the people behind, and focus on infrastructure and forget those who are directly impacted, for the sole reason that without people, you cannot achieve the transitions you want. Without social cohesion, you don't have the framework, or you don't have the cohesion to press forward these changes. And most importantly, it's how you do this. And I see a question in the chat. Those are difficult decisions when it comes to climate mobility. And this is what requires a lot of literacy and educating the people, engaging with them and building with them their adaptation journey. It's not about just coming and forcing people to move, including particularly when civil rights hits some neighborhoods, and then for safety reasons, people have to be moved. And we want and we wish for Germany to lead from the front, because it's at the essence and at the core of a rule-based multilateral order. If countries are let to go and fade from climate change, what will be left to international cooperation? Why would people stand when Germany or Europe is pushing for the rules and the principles that govern our world to be respected and to be pursued?
I get that estimating numbers is very difficult, but I would like to stay one more second in the finance aspect. There is a more than hundreds of billions adaptation gap every year already. Like, we really don't have far from enough money for adaptation. Where do you think could finance and the additional finance needed for climate mobility come from? Maybe you can contribute here, Rafaela.
No, I mean, what we are seeing and what we have to acknowledge is we haven't only seen USAID pulling out of everything. We are seeing a decrease in development finance, including in adaptation finance from so many, especially European countries. And this is a fact, but it's also a fact that what we're seeing, and when we talk about people-positive adaptation journeys, preventing loss and damage, that it's much more cost-effective, both in the human losses, but also in the financial losses, if you plan, if you put knowledge and data into the hands of the people. So it also requires thinking about, as we were alluding to the how, and who has an interest in investing. Can we use satellite data? Can we work with other agencies? What are insurance models for people affected by the climate crisis? And there are incredible pilots out there that are working on these, and I think it's part of the job to figure out how we work with private sector, governments, philanthropy on these issues jointly. But it also will be a prioritization effort that we will all have to undertake, because there is for now not a growing set of resources out there.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned now that there are interesting pilots outside. Maybe to let people understand a little bit better, how can successful policy instruments to deal with climate mobility look like? Maybe you can mention 2 or 3 best practices that come to your mind.
I mean, I can
Yes.
start. Kamal, you start.
Yes. No, just to build on what Rafaela mentioned, this is why the Berlin Climate Mobility Forum is useful, is to shape those new partnerships, these new cooperations, where not only one party is expected to do everything, whether one side or the other, but it's a collection of champions coming together to advance concrete progress. I'll give you one example. The countries that are usually hit by sudden onset, typhoon, floods, hurricanes, all the countries have their own national insurance. This national insurance kicks in usually between 4 to 6 months. Why? Because the big insurance have to assess the damage, they agree on the damage with government, and then they disperse the funds. What happens to the households and these countries that have been hit, for example, by a sudden onset, a hurricane or a flooding between the day they are hit and the 4th month? If the government does not have resources and funds to pull in, these people are left on their own. So what we have been able to develop working with insurance companies is a micro insurance, micro flooding insurance that is household based. Small amounts of money, for example, in Tuvalu or in Palau, we're looking, and in St. Kitts and Nevis, how households could get a micro insurance of $20 to $30 per year, but it could trigger a premium of $2,000 to $5,000 if tragically they are hit by flooding. Those $2,000 to $5,000 can help the family, the household, bridge that gap between the day they are hit until the government receives their insurance payment in order to step in. So people can do that transition or that in dignity. They don't need to beg for food. They don't need to fight for water. They have the resources. But this should go with other aspects, which means plan for it, plan for shelter, plan for housing in higher grounds, protect the shores. And it's the same thing for desertification. Have a better crop, better management of water. Because if we abuse the planet, there is no planet B.
Thank you.
And if just to add to that, and I think when you look at the communities and the community level, it's about leadership and it's about knowledge. So if the communities have the knowledge, the data, understanding what is going on, and this is a lot of we've had so many incredible conversations with, for example, Uganda, where we've been doing climate mobility deep dives, who shared how important it was then to bring it really to the district level in the cities. And there's this growing communities of mayors who experience in their cities, as we were sharing earlier, how heavy the effects of climate mobility are, the climate disasters, risks in their cities. So they are taking on the leadership in planning, in city development. And we helped create a global cities fund that gives resources to cities directly. And what cities can do with 100, 200, 300,000 euros is incredible in setting up an infrastructure that really helps the community to prepare and to plan, versus a much higher costs when disaster hits and when you have to respond at that point. And cities and a lot of the governments that also convened here at the forum, they're doing the math of preparing for that. And I think when you look at development finance, that's a math that has to come into with the resources that we have available for this work.
So what you mentioned right now, and as well the Community Climate Adaptation Fund, these are finance flows that go rather directly to communities or cities in affected areas, right? So the way that you're like focusing on is much more like more direct finance flows instead of supporting national government.
And this is something, just to say, this is what philanthropy can do, and we are doing this with a lot of other philanthropic donors. It's still very, very hard for governments to invest in such funds because of the rules, the restrictions, the ways of working. So this is also a call of experimenting and public-private partnerships that are emerging, that we are pushing for, that we are experimenting with, and the readiness also to go in. But it's a challenge that philanthropy will not solve. And we can bring all the big donors, philanthropic donors from the world into this issue. We will not be the ones who bring the majority of resources to the table. So we need to work in partnerships. And there was just a comment in the chat that really put the needle on it, that the difficulty of accessing those big funds and the way small island development countries, for example, have to access these is really something that we are seeing across the board, and why then also our more unrestricted, faster injections to help the communities are so much valued in this context.
Lisa, if I may, what we have seen from the calls for proposals and the projects that we are rolling, particularly in the Pacific, is that communities are also putting their skin in these projects. I give you an example. We are working to move some, in a village, there is the first line of housing in the village is impacted by repeated landslide as a result of rain. And this approach, as I said, is small grants, up to 100,000 euros. And we said, this is what the grant could be about. And they said, okay, we will bring the wood, we will ensure the labor, we will do this. Can we then scale up the project? And then the government says, okay, I will add X and Y and T. And then the private sector says, I love what you're doing. We will also bring an additional dollar to the table. And I think this is what makes one small grant that is community targeted, bring the community to own the project, because instead of going and buying the wood, they said, we have it, the lumber, we have the manpower. And the government already has some projects to support communities of financing, but not at the scale. These are the kind of exercises we want to make as a normal approach to support communities, as normal exercise to get the resources in the hand of communities to design the way they want to adapt and to design how they want to adapt amidst changing climate.
So did I get you right that you've been saying, like, if we target money directly to community, it's also kind of a leverage because they bring their own resources to the table? Okay.
And it forces governments also to be supportive and constructive. I give you, for example, the case of Palau. The entire machinery, the machines to do the work is provided by the government. So we don't have to lease it. The manpower is provided by the youth and the community. They said, we have engineers, we have the manpower, and we are supporting the purchase or the procurement of the material. And you had three: community, government, and the GCCM or the CCAP fund that together make a project much more scalable, much more useful, and much more powerful as impact it relates. And then it's owned by the community. We are a UN entity. This is a UN fund, but it's not a UN project. It's a community project.
Thank you. I would already come to my last questions, but I would ask both of you, and maybe also President Masisi wants to come back and join here. Which, for both of you or the three of you, I'd like to mention very briefly, which are the steps that we need to take in the international climate mobility discourse until COP30 in November?
Come on, start.
So, for example, on sea level rise, and I saw it in the chat, we have pressed and pushed for now 2 to 3 years to acknowledge a set of principles that, regardless of sea level rise impacts, country cannot lose its rights, its sovereignty. We have progressed very much in that space. We have moved what they call in international law on the presumption of statehood continuity to the principle of statehood continuity. We ask from Germany and Europe to join the community of nations, from the United States to Korea, the African countries, Japan, all small island developing states, and assert that statehood, it's not something that is negotiable. Integrity, territorial integrity is not negotiable, whether it's a country invading another or the climate change taking eating out of your shores. And we are very close. We have progressed very much. So we want and we expect Germany during the next General Assembly to press forward this issue. Second, we want and we expect the Germany and Europe as we move towards Berlin, but first in New York, to assert that climate mobility, it's an adaptation means, it's an adaptation mechanism. And as such, we need to acknowledge the right to stay. We need to acknowledge the right to development locally. We need to change the means we do finance, and not replacing but complementing. And last but not least, we need to ensure that there are climate mobility pathways regionally, locally, for those who will be regrettably forced to leave the places they call home, pathways that are in dignity, in solidarity, and in rights. We would like that conversation to grow, to take an anchorage, and then, of course, to land consensus as we move forward towards Berlin and beyond.
And just to add on to that, and at the same time, what we all need to do while pushing on the political agenda is the implementation piece. It's through the funding, the adaptation facilities, through other funds, work with the communities, because the communities are the ones that can share what works, what are the good examples. We need to bring them into those fora and processes. Here at the forum, we had such important voices from the communities, the youth that were sharing how they're effective, but with optimism, what they can do, what they want to do, what they lead on. And this is something, it's so powerful. There are ideas out there, there is energy out there in this agenda. And I think we were, in the end, in one workshop, we dialed in colleagues from other parts of the world who were discussing on similar issues, and they were so surprised about the positive energy in the room that we had here in Berlin, because people are energized, they want to work, and they want to bring the work to their community. So we need to show that, we need to bring them into those conversations, and that's what we will do also in the coming months with the UN High Level Week, with COP, and then moving into next year, of course, as well.
Okay, thank you. There are already some questions in the chat, but I also invite all the participants to type their questions if you have more. But I already chose the first one, and I also, like, from my own reporting experiences, I've been in areas where communities are really losing their land due to sea level rise. There's like adaptation is kind of limited, and the adaptation possibilities. They also have their culture there, their belongings, but also their cultural heritage. How can we deal with that, Kamal? Maybe that's a question for you. What possibilities are there forward?
So not only what possibilities, I can tell you what is being done for the last 3 to 4 years. First, we are working closely with, I take the example of atoll countries, the most impacted. The atoll countries, for those who cannot realize it, the highest point is 1.5 meter, which means it takes one wave to impact the entire country. We are working and supporting land reclamation. We are supporting through micro projects, protection of shores. Second, as it relates to rights, it's maritime zones. As it relates to rights, it's sovereignty. We worked closely including through a coalition of cross-regional countries from Africa, Europe, Asia, Latin America, and the Americas at large, coalition that has been co-chaired by Germany and Tuvalu. These efforts were brought to the United Nations. The agenda was created. Leaders came together last September. They agreed on a set of principles. There is another summit next year to agree and adopt a set of principles. And one of them is what I mentioned, the principle of statehood continuity, that a state cannot stop existing because of physical changes to its nature as a result of climate change. That people cannot lose their right because they lost part of their land. Second, it's projects to support protection of heritage and culture. And here we're working, Germany is also leading from the front with the Deutschland Archaeological Institute and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on how to create a repository for all the knowledge and the culture of affected communities, how to use the digital space to that end. We're also trying to build projects on how to ensure sustainability of the craftsmanship and the skill. Third is how to bring these stories outside, how to have people exposed to what is happening through voices, a whole set of videos, programs, connections on voices from the front lines. So a lot is being taking place, a lot is being tested in order to be adjusted. Now we have proof of concept is how to scale up. Instead of 2-3 communities from 2-3 countries, you have many communities, including in Europe, including in the United States, in Alaska, that are impacted, that could also share that story. Because at the end is how do we come together to share a common path? Empathy is strength. Selfishness is destruction.
Thank you for laying out all these possibilities. Maybe just one small follow-up question, because I think it's rather difficult sometimes to imagine what does this actually mean? What could all these policies together mean for a person that actually has lost their home on a small island state?
So if for example, as it's whether he or she can move within the island. Is there space to move within the island? Has that been anticipated and planned? So it's not a crisis, it's a managed retreat. That's number one. If there is no land, how we can do land reclamation? If there is no land reclamation, what are the options? So people can move with dignity. On this, for example, we have worked closely and supported the Filapile treaty agreement, which provides for the safe pathways amidst climate change and climate mobility between Tuvalu and Australia, where Tuvaluans can move to Australia in a circular mobility exercise with all the rights and all the privileges as Australians. This is, Lisa, very much similar to the mobility you have in Europe. When a German is in Barcelona, he is not a migrant. He is not a foreigner, because that was the mindset that the community wanted to set, the freedom of movement. And that those are the pathways that we are encouraging, so people are not considered as migrant, refugee, or second-class citizen. It's the same thing. It's the same ambition that Europe achieved for a different purpose that we would like to press forward in the context of climate change at the regional level, at the national level. And we are quite happy that there are examples and precedents, both between countries, both within countries, that can lead that effort and could be scaled up.
So there is also a need for legal instruments, I understood. Maybe there was also a question about this, because I think it's pretty clear that there is a legal gap on how to address the people or the rights of the people that are displaced and have to cross borders. The German Sachverständigenrat für Integration und Migration, the Expert Council on Migration and Integration, 2 years ago proposed climate passports and climate visa for people displaced by the climate crisis. Would you say that would be a good instrument to access these legal gaps?
So definitely there are legal gaps. We just need to keep into perspective two things. There is sudden onset and slow onset. You could be hit by hurricane and you could be impacted by drought. So it's two timelines. And we realize very much one important aspect that we discussed. People do not want to go very far from home. You take, for example, the regions that are impacted by the climate shocks, the Eastern Caribbean. Eastern Caribbean, they already have a free movement. The pathway is already there. It's just how it is adjusted to support and to enable climate mobility, which means investing in that, in the implementation of the freedom of movement, investing when climate shocks hit, and that investments require support. How one city, for example, in St. Kitts and Nevis, becomes the shelter of another city in Bahamas if it's hit, and it happens already before. The same thing in the Pacific when the volcano erupted in Tonga, how another country, another island next door becomes the shelter of that island. We need to plan, and we need to anticipate, plan, and build for that. So those are sudden onset. For this sudden onset, definitely such instruments, legal instruments of visas, of temporary protection are necessary, and they do exist. They exist in the United States, they exist in Sweden, they exist in the UK. The idea is how to make them sustainable, how to make them anchored in a sense of response and responsibility, and how to make them easy for access. Noting very well that somebody who has been hit in Bahamas has no interest to move into Germany to that end. But if you happen to be in Germany when your country or island has been hit, do I force you to go back, or you wait until that process of cleaning, that process of safety, and that process of clearance has taken place? Those are the small instruments. Most importantly is how do we support and help those impacted by the slow onset, and those who want to move within their countries, those who want to move within their region, where the freedom of movement is already there. But it's the instruments to enable it, the instruments to support it, the instruments to enrich it for climate, the nexus of climate change and human mobility do not exist.
Okay, thank you. We are already heading towards the end. There's one question in the chat that's maybe a good question to end this conversation, and I would hand it over to Rafaela first. Before we talked a lot about the international level and how climate mobility could be integrated in plans there, and maybe we can go a level deeper, lower now, and look what should national policymakers prioritize to develop frameworks and action plans to tackle climate migration.
So there's a lot that can be done. One is there are processes like national adaptation plans, the preparation in multilateral fora. And what we are seeing in a lot of pilot countries and their community is working across government levels, from the communities with the national governments, bringing them into the conversation, consultations, bringing in the youth, education about the climate crisis, the effects, co-designing ideas, and it can emerge into a kind of into really thinking through what are the needs, and then bringing that to financing opportunities, bringing that to the political level. And I think we heard from so many countries, that many of whom we mentioned here over the past two days, their readiness to lead. And I think there was also a question in the chat, where is leadership on this? And also thanks to the work of Kamal and his team, working with leaders who are ready and bringing them together is so crucial. And there are so many countries wanting to do that, willing to do it, having to do it, and they bring on board their communities for that work. And that is something that I find quite humbling, very impressive. And looking at Germany specifically, I think we have started building a community here in Berlin who works on this issue, who's collaborating. I saw a lot of comments in the chat about other initiatives that are already doing this. Link up. I think that's the beauty of this community that is growing. It's not a set group of people that are doing this work. And there are so many ideas to be developed. There's so much to be done. And if that is built in national contexts and then brought together on the regional and on the global level, then we've made a huge step forward, inspiring each other and learning from each other, and ultimately helping those who are affected the most.
Thank you. Kamal, maybe because this was also asked, as Rafaela focused more on what Germany can do, you can give us perspective what especially developing countries could do.
I think the developing countries, at least from our experience, have shown strong leadership on this. One is by ensuring the prioritization of their communities and their needs. Second, that they stand ready and have already acted on bringing climate mobility into their national adaptation plans, into their national budgets, ensuring that a set of principles when it comes to land use, land rights, is adapted and adjusted to such reality. Ensuring that the government supports the local adaptation by providing and investing in local communities, but also to support those who are forced to move or are forced to leave the places they call home. They, on the international space, they have, as mentioned by Rafaela, we are for the first time saying, whether, regardless where you are politically anchored in the global north, that the people of the global south who are impacted by this nexus want to adapt locally, want to stay home, and want to live in dignity and rights. And that aligns very much with the principles of agency, the principles of local support, the principles of local empowerment that many countries, many governments, whether on the left and or on the right, have set as their agenda. So there is a consensus that is emerging, and I think that consensus we want to consolidate, both in this now, in the north, in the south, both affected and communities and others, and pretty much start to build the ecosystem, or further that ecosystem around it, bring all the different partners, not only governments, not only civil society and foundation, but private sector, youth, teachers and others to educate. And last but not least is how we can finance that new consensus beyond the dichotomies that we have seen the last 10 years, whether on migration, on asylum, or on climate. There is really an opportunity for a beautiful story, a story of positive adaptation, a story of empathy, a story of collaboration, and a story of a shared common purpose. We have now a new coalition of coastal cities, from Hamburg to Lagos to Port Vila in Vanuatu, that are keen to work together. That's what we need. And regrettably, in the world that we see today, an unraveling world where based rule system that we have seen is being challenged, where predictability is not taken for granted, and where collaboration is flattering, we can inject that sense of positive momentum through this space.
Thank you both, especially Kamal, for this also very positive outlook. I think sometimes that's needed in this climate world that's so full of doom and gloom nowadays. I hope you can now relax a little bit after the conference the last day, and thank you for being here. President Masidi, do you also want to say some last words? You're currently muted.
I'm fine, my dear. I've been listening. I've been taking it all in. I couldn't agree more. It's really impactful and useful. And I really like the connection of between what we're doing here and the rest of the globe, and particularly developed countries like Germany. It has so much to offer. I'm really proud of being part of this. Thank you enormously, Lisa. Apt questions, beautiful answers.
Thank you to the three of you, and have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.